Okay, so y'all ready to take a look at the next piece of the puzzle? What we've been doing is mapping Osiris. And when I say Osiris, what I basically mean is Osiris hieroglyph is an eye on a throne. And what we found out about what the eye on the throne is if we take a look at the eye of Ra, we find that the eye of Ra is actually a map to the brain. And this particular thing that you see right here is a clue to let us know. And what they are doing with this was staff is they are measuring the spinal column, and what you see right here where this guy's arms open up is where the throne sits. So when we overlay the eye of Ra, the eye on a throne, which is basically Osiris, and we overlay this information on top of it, what we see is that they are indeed mapping the spinal column, and or they are measuring it with this was staff. This right here is a human skull from a medical photo, and this eye of Ra that you see here is original Egyptian art. And so I've used originals of both as well as an MRI of a brain in order to get a very realistic sense of what we're dealing with. So the nature of that particular hieroglyph, as we see, is to measure. It's to measure the from the tip of the sacrum all the way to what ends up being the pineal gland, which is located right where these three areas come together. Right in the middle of that is where the pineal gland is located. Now you remember this graphic here. This is a hieroglyph showing a person standing in the middle of a tree, and his eye is in the middle of this tree, and this tree ends up being a larger head. What I noticed is that these people tend to stand with their bodies at this certain angle that you see right here from this leg to this shoulder is what we see, this particular bend right here. And what I noticed was when we take the brain stem and we use the slot right there and we place that brain stem inside of there, what we end up seeing is something that is the same as the human here, and the center point of the brain stem is the same point as the center point of this person's eye. It is a alchemy or hieroglyph to show us that these various fractals of man, from large to small, all ending in the pineal gland. So right here we took that same tree and we put it on top of the skull with the person in it, and sure enough the person ends up being right here behind the thalamus, his eye being where the pineal gland is located. And notice where the pons is and the way it fits into the eye of Ra. So that took us to the Great Pyramid. And what we found out about the Great Pyramid is the same things that we see right here. These are basically cervical vertebrae, and they're showing the same thing. And taking the same angle that we saw, see the angle that we see right here going on, that was the clue that I thought of in order to look in the Great Pyramid. We have this same angle that we see here as we see here, and that's what brought me to the Great Pyramid. So what did we discover there? Well, we discovered all kinds of cool little things. Number one, we noticed that when we use the was staff, and remember it was key because the was staff is divided into two prongs at the very bottom. So in order to properly measure from the sacrum up to the pineal gland, and the reason the eye of Ra is on him as well is that we can properly measure where the throne is supposed to be, and keep measurements with everything. And so we noticed if we spear the very tip of the coccyx with his toe located right on that thing, notice right here where his toe is located, and you'll notice the lines that follow up his leg that I've got highlighted in red, and you can even see that on his leg there's these indications, even with the line that they've drawn across here, to let us know that this kind of thing is what's supposed to be used here. The interesting thing about the Egyptians and these and the pyramid and these various hieroglyphs. And I believe that one of the reasons why they used phi, if you think about using phi, it's just it's a wonderful thing to use, especially if you want to, for example, take any of these pieces and plug them into another hieroglyph. All you have to do is adjust the size of it, and as long as the proportion is adjusted along with it, you can properly check to see whether or not you're looking at the same thing or not. You can extrapolate something from one hieroglyph and apply it to another and see whether you're on target or not. And because of phi, that's the reason why these particular things fall in there as easily as they do. And so what the Great Pyramid, you see the lines down his arm and the vertebrae, and I've got these various vertebrae marked off. You can see at each line here, they represent a vertebrae. We have 1, 2, 3, we have 4, 5, 6, 7. These various ones, these markings, and I believe that there are 7 vertebrae in the whole cervical column, and then you have these last 4, and the last 4 are what you normally see in a jed pillar, and what you normally see on a jed pillar on the top of it is you see a sun. The sun represents fractally, it either represents the whole head or it represents the pineal gland. It really depends on what level of the fractal you want to go. So the Great Pyramid, what I am seeing here is at least one of its functions, and this is what I thought before. It is a map to show the fractal nature of man. And we're going to see how this comes into play here in just a minute. There's something that you might notice right here as well. This white dashed line that you see right here is located right at the back of his skull. The was staff that you see right here is located a little bit before his skull, and you can see that that goes right down his spinal column. What we also notice too is that when we spear the tip of the coccyx, the spine has to be perfectly erect. That's what allows us to get to the pineal gland area. And you're going to notice that what he's actually doing is grabbing the spinal cord itself with his hand inside the Queen's chamber, right where the heart is. Now, we mapped, you know, they always used phi, and all this stuff that you see over here are various golden rectangles flipped vertically or what have you in order to figure out what these ancient Egyptians were doing. And they always give certain markers on themselves to let you know where you need to be as far as being able to do a map. And these are various temples along the Nile. These are the Great Pyramids right here, and just above them is the throne area that you see right here. This is the throne that you see. It's going across. And that's going to come in really good handy when we check it out here just a bit. Here's the two-pronged was staff that you see right here. Here's where the Temple of Man starts, and that is, you'll notice the curve of the sacrum. Once again, we mapped the whole Nile as a fractal map of man. You can even see all the way down to the root here, and this is a real spinal cord, and you can see at the very bottom it does the same thing on the Nile that it does at the bottom of a spinal cord. And then when you get to the sacrum, you can see that that right here it does the same thing that the sacrum does, and right there is where the Temple of Man is located. And it's my opinion that the reason the Temple of Man was placed there is because it marks the beginning of a journey up the spinal column of Egypt. And as we see right here, when we mapped these areas to the human body of phi, you can see clear indications that the Nile is doing the same thing that the body is doing. For example, when we get up to this phi line right here where the first rib is, the Nile cuts sharply over. And then it follows the rib cage out and back in, all the way up until we get up to this throne area where it opens up just like it does inside a skull, this being the throat area. All this is mapped just like the human body. The Great Pyramids, where they're located, is important. And so when we think of man as a fractal thing, where there's larger and smaller scales of man, then what the pyramid represents there is something interesting, because where the throne sits, that's the same thing as the throne of the Eye of Ra. And when you understand what the pyramids are showing on the inside, then you understand why they are placed where they are in accordance to the whole Nile, because they are placed in an area that represents a larger version and a smaller version of man. So what does it tell us about the Great Pyramid? Well, it tells us that the base of the pyramid is either the throne of the Eye of Ra, and the throne is this thing right here, this gold thing that goes across. It's either the throne or it represents a smaller version of man. And once again, what we did was we used, and you notice the size of this white box right here. We'll see how this also comes in handy here in a minute. They used phi with this as well. You'll notice how all these things just lock right onto his body. And this is kind of the way some of these hieroglyphs work, is because there's not there's not like some mathematical procedure that you can use really to figure out what they're doing. What happens is that as you have a clue in your head, or as you think you might know something, it's almost you have to use intuition really. And as you begin experimenting, what happens is you'll see these visual clues just all of a sudden pop up. Like, for example, when you are resizing something, or if you are putting pieces together in a puzzle, all of a sudden you'll get this immediate visual clue, and it leads you to thinking about other things. And eventually what happens is you end up being right on the money about stuff. But there's no particular logical, mathematical procedure that you can follow. But the wonderful thing about what they did is that they used phi. So when we see other things out there, like this particular stone pyramid that I just found earlier tonight, we get a better indication of what we're dealing with, because all I had to do was resize it to fit the base of the pyramid, right where this base of the pyramid is, and we can see some instant visual clues about what's going on. And if you'll notice, the jed pillar at the top represents the last four of what you see right here. And we already saw that the reason these are cut and they angle down like this is because they follow the spinal cord, the vertebrae of somebody. If they are profile, if their face is pointed to the right, these right here follow the lines of their vertebrae. And so when we see these two life symbols that we see right here, and notice where the sun is up here, and you usually see that on top of somebody's head in ancient Egypt. And if you'll notice too, the size of this thing that you see, are some interesting things I discovered about that as well. But what we're going to go over, I just wanted to give you a quick review of what all this is. A Great Pyramid, what I have discovered about it is it appears to be at least one of its probably many functions is it appears to be a fractal map of man. It shows man from the very small to the very large, and there are some key indicators that when you start playing around with it, and having already done this and having found this kind of stuff already before, I did this a lot faster probably than the average person would, just because I knew what to look for. Because I have already discovered this kind of stuff that it's showing us in land, in nebula, and all these other things. And it is very basically these smaller and larger versions of man. For some reason, the fractal is always showing the man's profile with his face turned to the right. That's what you seem to see in both land and all these smaller and larger versions. And so these indicators, when you can just take something else and you can plug it in and you can see how you're dealing with the same thing, then it's pretty obvious that what we're dealing with these right here has to do with the human body. I've discovered a couple of was staffs also, and some other staves that have a jed pillar at the top, some with a life symbol at the very top of it. But anytime you see this jed pillar here, it represents the vertebrae or the backbone of somebody. Okay, so now here's what I've discovered, and what I'm going to show you is I've found one larger version that I can show you on land of man. But beyond that, there are no satellite photos. There is not enough memory on my computer in order to be able to work with high enough resolution graphics in order to not make my computer crash. It's kind of a challenge to do this to begin with, because if you want to be able to see anything without it looking really fuzzy at a large level, or without it looking where you can't see it very well. In other words, it would be great if I had the ability to be able to zoom in and still get just as good a graphics, but I can't always do that. But we're going to see it's going to be very clear what's going on. So when I looked at this, one of the things that I noticed was that there are some interesting markers that we see right here. You see where his skull is? His skull and the was staff. Well, his skull is on the very back. The very back of his skull divides on the pyramid, so that should always be a marker to let us know that the skull should be right there. We should also always find ourselves with the pineal gland always right at the tip of this thing. And so when we take a look at this area right here to the edge of the pyramid, I believe that would be the same ratio as what we see from this was staff to the middle of the pyramid. And we're going to see why, because when we take a large skull and we place it to where, well, I'll show you real quick. Here's what ends up happening here. So notice that you have this area right here, and the skull fits nicely right through that, you see? But you can see that this pyramid sticks out a little bit. And what I believe that is if we come up here and we zoom in, we can see that the middle pyramid, the middle part of the pyramid, lines up with the edge of the pyramid. And so you'll also notice that the very top of this rooftop right here is also sitting where the throne is. And then we have the same thing applied up here, so we can zoom in even more. And you can see how it's kind of getting fuzzy. There's not much I can do about that. But you'll notice that right here, zoom in just a little bit more, right there is where his pineal gland is. So for this guy, the guy larger than him, and the guy larger than him, all the pineal glands, they all are located in the same area. And where the throne sits on all these, you'll notice, you see this line going across that rooftop looking thing inside the Great Pyramid. You see this gold bar. The throne is sitting right on top of that. And so when we go back out a little further, so we can see that pyramid is lined up against the middle of the pyramid. And here's what you'll also notice too. The gold throne and the stem coming off of it. Well, the stem coming off of it happens to be the exact same width as the white box that you see right here. And if we zoom all the way back out and look down here, we can see that this white box right here is the same width as this right here. So that is basically a slot for us to put the Eye of Ra or a brain or the thing in there from the larger head. So all this is telling us about the body. And look at the slope of this thing follows the bone. You see that on the skull? You see that, how it follows the bone? These are our indicators right here, because this followed the bone, remember? And this follows the bone of the skull all the way up, and it kind of sits in there like a cradle. And the edge of the skull is right there. There's also some other interesting things here. Let's zoom all the way in real quick. And let's take a look at this. When we do our fractal, what's really interesting, a couple of things I noticed here. This guy that you see standing right here, and what is on top of his head, happens to be the same width as the thalamus right here. And we can zoom back out, And we see the same thing again. This thalamus right here is the same size as this right here. That's just one of the interesting visuals I noticed. And so you can see how the whole spinal cord, or the whole spinal column, acts as a brain stem when we zoom in. And so here's something else to check out. Look at the pons in his rib cage. Pons in his rib cage are the same size. And here's where his sacrum ends, and you can see that that slot goes right down in there. So this from the sacrum to the pineal gland represents either the brain stem. Well, you could probably even do a fractal in between as well. You could do one probably from the heart all the way up as well. But this appears to be this particular fractal from this area, and that's what the whole angle is. That's why you see that these guys standing at a particular angle. Now here's where it gets interesting. This is where we're going to see the larger version of man. Okay, this one is not perfectly mathematically sound because you don't see any pyramids or anything like that around it. But you'll notice that on all of these that you see right here on the various fractal sizes, there's something I've always thought that was kind of interesting, and that is that when I knew this was a skull when I was looking at it, or I knew it was a head pointed to the right, what I always thought was really interesting is that right here around the eye area, you can see the way that the land kind of comes in right here and almost takes off kind of like the front of his face in a way. And so I was always wondering what that was all about. But then when we take a look over here, can you see why his face might be taken off at the very top right there? It's because this right here is the thalamus, and the thalamus is taking this area just like it's doing right here off the front of his head. Because when you line all the pineal glands up, and even if we go closer, the same thing is happening right here as well. This thing right here is cutting into the front of his head, and that's our indication that we have this larger version of man going on. So let me show you where it kind of goes from there. So I've shown you guys this before, but what I showed it to you with was the Orion Nebula, which we're going to get into next time. But take a look here on the right. You're going to notice that the thalamus dips into his head right here. And we already know this right here maps to a person. The whole Egypt is Phi right here. So at a larger level, then all of the Nile Delta right here is actually mapping to a pineal gland of something even larger. And as you can see right here, the dark part of the land that's right here is following the same lines as you see on this side of the eye. Then you have the disc taking off part of the head in the front, which is the exact same thing that you're seeing right here. So all of this whole land is showing the same fractal at a larger level. It's following the exact same rules that we've seen in the alchemy so far. So we have this fractal, and it has something to do with the brain or the mind. And even the optic chiasm that you see right here, this dark area right here, where you see the edge of it, is where that optic chiasm goes. And my maps of the Orion Nebula on top of this area right here are pretty obvious if you know what you're looking for. Now you can see the actual fractal of man that's going on. So that's this whole area of the Nile, all the way down to the center point, which is Osiris, which is the pineal gland area. That's your center point. And guess what? This happens to be the very center of all of the land masses on the planet, right here. So finally, what I've got here for you guys, let me just back out a little bit for you, is I've got an overlay, probably the best that I can do with my own human error, to show you kind of the way the fractal looks. And we'll just increase the opacity a little bit, and you'll see that what you have right here is the same. You see this brown land right here, which is the very front part of the brain, front part of the cerebrum. That maps to the dark land that you see right here, right? And the thalamus taking off his head in the front, you can see that that's happening as well. And you can see right in front of the corpus callosum, the first part of the front part of the cerebrum is the same thing that you see right here, right in front of corpus callosum. You have this brown area right here. Right in front of the corpus callosum, you have these dark mountains right here. Here is your fractal of man that you're looking at right here. So the next time we'll get into Orion, but I hope that as you can see, I've confirmed all the stuff that I've found previously. And there we go. And there's all these indicators. The pyramid is a map of the human body. It is a map of the fractal nature of man from the smallest to the largest. And we've seen it now from man to entire Egypt to Egypt, Israel, all the way to Jordan, showing the inner part of the brain. Hope y'all enjoyed that. Y'all take care. I'll talk to you soon.